it's...
Ici.
You do. Oh, it's this one.
Yeah.
Okay, so good evening. So it's a real pleasure and an honor for me to give this talk here. So I will be talking mostly about the discovery that has been made at CERN 2 weeks ago. So namely about this person here, which is called Peter Higgs, and his particle or his boson, the Higgs boson. Right? So what will remain from this year 2012 is probably a list of questions and maybe a few answers also. So the first one is, for instance, is Nicolas Sarkozy going to be re-elected? The second one is the euro going to survive? And for how long? And then, of course, the most important one for all the physicists is the Higgs boson going to be discovered or not? So, of course, we want the answer to those questions because we want to know where we should invest our money. So, namely, which physics we should expect beyond the standard model. And there are a few cases. So, for instance, there is Greece. So nobody really wants to put money on Greece, and this is the equivalent of what is called Technicolor or Higgs-less model. And somebody here has already seen the consequences of this kind of thing. Then there is other countries like Portugal, Italy, Spain, and this is probably the equivalent of what is called the constrained MSSM, so the minimal supersymmetric standard model, which is in quite bad shape these days. Then there is other countries maybe more promising, like Netherlands, and this is the equivalent of natural or split SUSY, which are extended version of supersymmetric model, or maybe composite X model. But certainly the safest bet is remain Germany. And of course, this is nothing else simply than the standard model itself, right? Well, so as you know, the Higgs has been discovered, and even according to the New York Times, there is 5 sigma evidence. There have been 5 articles written about the Higgs boson in about 1 week. In particular, this last one by Steven Weinberg, which is quite interesting, and you should read it if you want to understand something about really high energy physics and why we should really found high energy physics. There is also some nice French newspaper. So they say that La Masse Edit, which is the equivalent of Ita Massa Est, right? Quite interesting newspaper. So what has been really discovered can be summarized basically in this kind of plots, which also give you the history about this discovery. So this is a plot that represents, or in the axis here, you have the mass of the Higgs, so the supposed mass of the Higgs boson, and this is simply the probability that what you observe actually simply corresponds to a fluctuation and not a signal. So that was the result that were presented last year, last July, at a physics conference in Grenoble, this European Physics Society conference, and that was the first excess that could be interpreted as a Higgs boson. So in the sense that the probability that this excess was corresponding to a fluctuation of the background was basically less than 1%. And then things have moved. For instance, you know that last December there were an important seminar at CERN that was the first evidence of the Higgs boson, let's say, presented to the general public, and that was corresponding to these peaks. And then a few months later, at the winter conferences in Morion, for instance, the excess went up a little bit, and there were a little bit of drama in physics because people say that we are losing the Higgs boson. And then finally, last 4th of July, on the Independence Day, there was this broad excess here with a probability below 5 sigma, so below 1 over 1 million of chance that this corresponds simply to a fluctuation of the background. So that was really the first time that people have seen the Higgs boson because this line was going below 5 sigma. So that's all what you know about the Higgs boson. Everything is summarized on those plots here. So I will elaborate a little bit about this discovery and maybe also about the implication. So the first thing that I want to tell you is why actually it is important to have the Higgs boson, or why the Higgs boson is not just yet another particle, that you add in your standard model. There is something peculiar about this particle. Then I will quickly go about possible implication of this discovery of the Higgs boson for some possible extension of the standard model, in particular the supersymmetric extension. And then maybe I will discuss try to comment exactly of what has been found, because people are claiming that we have found the Higgs boson, but as you have seen so far, we have simply seen some excess, and there is a long road to really claim that this actually corresponds to the Higgs boson itself. And then maybe also what should we measure next to go on in physics, right? So the importance of being the Higgs. So as you know, I hope that you know, that the fundamental interaction of particle physics, namely the strong, the weak, and the electromagnetic interaction, are actually described by gauge interaction that are associated to some symmetry group, and the symmetry group of the Standard Model is simply SU3 colors times SU2 left cross U1 of each pair charge. And I think this structure of the gauge interaction have been established for the first time about more than 40 years, 50 years ago almost, by this Gargamel experiment, which for the first time observed this kind of reaction, a muon neutrino interacting with a neutrino, with an electron. And this couldn't be interpreted simply by the exchange of the W boson or with a photon, and you really need to introduce a new kind of neutral gauge boson, which was called later on the Z boson. So that was the first evidence of this neutral current in the Standard Model, which is associated to the U1 of hypercharge, basically. Of course, gauge theory is not just a way to classify particles in a table, but gauge theory is really a dynamical principle that predicts some interaction among the particles. That's why it's so powerful in physics, because you just assume a symmetry and then you know automatically all the interaction among these different particles. And the structure of those gauge interactions have been well tested later on in various experiments, in particular at LEP, the predecessor of this LHC at CERN, that was looking, for instance, at E plus, E minus goes to 2Ws gauge boson. And there is various diagrams that contribute to those interactions. In particular, there is this diagram that involves the self-interaction of the gauge boson, which is really a signature of those non-abelian gauge interactions. And you can see when you are trying to compare with the experimental data that you really need to include those interactions predicted by the theory to be in agreement with the experimental data. So that was really a first clear confirmation of the structure, of the gauge structure of the Standard Model. The problem is that this gauge structure is very well respected when you are looking at the interaction of three particles. But actually, is badly violated when you are looking simply at the interaction between two particles, namely when you are looking at the masses of those two particles. So an interaction with two particles is simply the mass of those particles. And there is various ways to see that. So for instance, the electron together with the neutrino is forming a representation of this gauge group. So if this symmetry were an exact symmetry of the nature, those two particles should have the same masses. But this is not the case. I mean, the neutrino is almost massless, while the electron is a massive object compared to the neutrino. The problem is also that the gauge bosons, so the W and the Z, are massive objects. And it's good that they are massive because they really allowed, for instance, the sun to bright for many billions years. If the W were massless, basically the sun will have burned all his matter in a few seconds. So you really need to have massive W and massive Z in order for the people to survive long enough, right? And the problem is that the masses of those W and the Z are not, again, compatible with the gauge symmetry. So namely, they transform in this way, so it's a little bit mathematical, they transform along this transformation law, and this is not compatible with the mass term for those gauge bosons. So they won't leave the mass invariant under this transformation. So clearly, this calls for what has been known a spontaneous breaking of the gauge symmetry. So the symmetry is there, it's a symmetry of the theory, but in the vacuum, this symmetry is broken. And this is basically the idea of Peter Higgs and also other people like Engler and Brute, and also few Americans like Guralnik, Hagen, and Keeble. So we can also understand what is coming with the masses of those particles just using some simple relation between special relativity and quantum mechanics. So you have all learned that a particle of spin s has, in general, 2s plus 1 degrees of freedom. But this is not always the case when the particle is massless, and the way to understand it is basically, again, to recall some very elementary things about special relativity. Namely, a massless particle is never at rest, so it's always possible to distinguish the longitudinal direction of the motion. And this is why, in the sense, you can easily eliminate this longitudinal polarization, so namely that really the photon has only two polarizations, that's what we have learned in optics. while in principle, using the quantum mechanics rule, you have expected 3 degrees of polarization. 2 times 1 plus 1 is equal to 3. But this is not true for the photon, simply because the photon is a massless object. Of course, if the particle is massive, then the situation is quite different, because you can go into the rest frame of the particle where it's not moving anymore, and then there is no way to distinguish the longitudinal polarization compared to the transverse polarization. So this is telling you basically that there is a fundamental difference between a massive particle and a massless particle, in particular if the particle is a spin 1 particle. And there is various ways to see actually that there is also some peculiarity associated to this new physical polarization associated to the mass, which is called the longitudinal polarization. Namely, if you look at the polarization vector associated to this longitudinal polarization, you will find actually some element which is growing with the energy. And then you will encounter some problem when you are looking at the scattering of those longitudinal polarization because each of the elements is growing with the energy. So at the end, you will get a reaction which is growing with the energy. And at some point, you will lose probability that the sum of the probability is equal to 1. Is what we call, you lose perturbative unitarity in your theory. So you don't know exactly what is going to happen. You cannot do any computation, basically. So what we have learned, and that was for the first time emphasized by these people, which are also associated to the discovery of the Higgs boson, so namely Guralnik, Eiger. So basically, they were the first really to understand that 3 is equal to 2 plus 1 in the context of gauge theory. So namely 2 is the 2 transverse polarization, so the 2 transverse polarization of the photon, and this one is the longitudinal polarization of the W, of the massive W. So if those people get the Nobel Prize next October, you will know why, right? Simply because they have discovered that 3 is equal to 2 plus 1. So as I said, there is some peculiarity associated to those masses, is that simply, if you want to understand it from the mathematical point of view, you can simply rewrite, the mass term for the W and the Z simply as some kinetic term for this longitudinal polarization, which is called the Ghouston boson. The only issue is that this kinetic term actually also contains some interaction among those longitudinal polarization. So you can really expand this exponential. So you will first recover simply the usual kinetic term for this Ghouston boson, but you will also find some contact interaction, for instance, among 4 Ghouston bosons, and some contact interaction which are growing with the energy, because they involve some derivative. In such a way, as I was saying, that when you compute the scattering amplitude of those longitudinal polarization, you will end up with scattering amplitude which is growing with the energy. So this is something that basically is not consistent when you extrapolate at very high energy. Right? So this is just telling you that the fact that we have discovered that the W and the Z have some masses immediately tell you that you will discover new physics at some point, because the description in terms of the degrees of freedom that you have discovered is not consistent when you are trying to extend it to very high energy. So this is a very powerful argument in physics, where you just measure something and automatically you immediately understand that you will discover something else at higher energy. And what is good about this argument is also that you know exactly at which scale you should find something else. Because this description basically stops to make sense at an energy scale which is 4 pi times V, and V is basically associated to the mass of the W. And if you put the number, you will find something of the order of 3 TeV. And this is exactly why the LHC has been built, because we knew before LHC that we have to discover new physics below this scale in order to have a consistent theory, to make the theory consistent. And of course, one possibility was simply to introduce this Higgs boson, or this Higgs particle. So what is it, this Higgs particle? So the Higgs scalar field is simply a new degree of freedom that you want to couple to this longitudinal W and W and the Z. So you write the more general thing that makes sense. So there is just a linear coupling of this Higgs boson to the longitudinal W and the Z, and there is a quadratic coupling, and you can also introduce some coupling to the fermion. And then in addition to the contact interaction, now you get an additional contribution to WW scattering, which is just coming from the exchange of the Higgs boson. So the fact that the X talks to the W, so there is a new diagrams that really contribute to WW scattering. So in addition to this term in the scattering amplitude that was growing with the energy, now you have another term that corresponds to the exchange of the Higgs boson. And you can very easily also compute this new contribution because there is a propagator, so it goes like 1 over S minus the mass of the Higgs boson. And then it's simply proportional to the square of this linear interaction between the X and the W. And each of those interactions contain two derivatives, so they also grow like S. So basically, it grows like S squared divided by the propagator. And what you notice in this expression is that for this particular value of A, so the linear coupling, so if A is equal to 1, then asymptotically, for very large energy, for energy which are much larger than the mass of the Higgs boson, then those two terms cancel, and you are left with a scattering amplitude that remains finite at high energy. So this is exactly how basically you restore perturbative unitarity simply by introducing a scalar field, the Higgs boson, with very peculiar coupling to the W and the Z. So of course, now you have introduced more particles. So you also have to check, the behavior of the scattering amplitude in inelastic channel when you basically produce these new degrees of freedom. So for instance, you can look at WW goes to 2 X's, and here in this case, you need a cancellation between those two diagrams. So there is a contact interaction between 2 Higgs boson and 2 W's. So this one is proportional to B, this quadratic coupling. And there is also the square of this linear coupling here, right? So basically here you can check that perturbative unitarity is maintained, so namely this scattering amplitude will remain finite at very high energy, provided that B is equal to A squared. And then there is a third channel, actually, which is WW goes to 2 fermion, and in this case there is a standard model diagrams plus the exchange of the Higgs boson. In this case, you need to tune this new coupling of the Higgs to the fermion, this coupling C, to be equal to 1 over A, just to ensure the cancellation at very high energy. So basically, this is how you get the standard model Higgs boson, simply by tuning this particular coupling of an arbitrary scalar resonance to the W and to the fermion. So the standard model Higgs boson exactly corresponds to A equal B equal C equal to 1. And in this case, actually, you can do a little bit of mathematics to rewrite this Lagrangian into the more traditional form, namely you want to combine the ghost tone together with this additional scalar degrees of freedom to form actually a doublet of the SU2 symmetry. And then you can simply rewrite this Lagrangian as the usual covariant kinetic term for the Higgs boson. So this is how you actually produce at the LHC the Higgs boson. So you start typically with some protons. So the protons are accelerated, in this big accelerator. And inside the proton, you have some gluon. And the gluon actually are talking to the Higgs boson, so they produce the Higgs boson. And then the Higgs decays into standard model-like particle, the W, the Z, the photon, etc. And out of that, you get some very nice picture just for the press, for the general public. So this is a representation of what is actually going on in this accelerator and this detector. So you produce the Higgs boson, and the Higgs boson decays. And in this case, it is decaying into 2 photons. So that's typically what you are looking at in your big detectors. So as I say, the standard model X is very predictive because you know all the couplings. The only things that we didn't know so far was the mass of the Higgs boson. So basically, as a single unknown parameter, you can compute everything. You can compute the production cross-section. So there is various ways actually to produce the Higgs boson. There is this fusion of gluon that produces the Higgs boson, but there is also the fusion of W's or more complicated production mode. And this is exactly what is shown in this plot, depending on the energy at which the LHC is running. So last year it was running, for instance, at 7 TeV. This year we are going to 8 TeV, and ultimately in a few years, actually the LHC will be running at 14 TeV. And this makes a difference because it's easier to produce more Higgs boson if the energy of the LHC is higher, basically. And then, as I was saying, the Higgs boson is just an unstable particle. It decays immediately, basically. And this is a plot that shows you exactly as a function of the mass what you expect in the decay of the Higgs boson. So for X, if the X were very light, below 100 of GeV, basically it decays almost all the time into pairs of B quark. For 125, the mass that has been observed, let's see at the LHC, actually there is a combination it decays predominantly in B quarks, but it also decays into Ws and other particles. So 125 is very perfect masses for the experimentalists because they can measure plenty of things, because you really have access to many decay modes of the Higgs boson. So now if you want to look also at the numbers, so typically the cross-section, the production cross-section of the Higgs boson is of the order of 10 picobarn, and the luminosity accumulated at the LHE so far is of the order of 10 inverse femtobarn. So this means that the LHE has already produced about 10 to the fifth Higgs boson. So it's not that we have observed one, right? The LHE has produced 10 to the fifth Higgs boson. And the tevatron has also produced about the same number, actually. A little bit lower because the energy of the tevatron is smaller. Nonetheless, it's the order of magnitude. So we have already produced plenty of Higgs boson. Now the other thing is that you have to produce them, but you have basically to observe them. And this is much more difficult because of these diagrams. So these diagrams is basically the cross-section of the various processes that you can observe at the LHE. So there is a total cross-section, so basically the total number of events that you can see, and the production cross-section of the Higgs boson is down there. And if you look at the number, it's a logarithmic plot here, you will see that there is about 10 order of magnitude between the Higgs boson and the total cross-section. So this means that only 1 out of 10 billion of events are actually interesting for what you are looking at. And just to give you an order of magnitude, Shakespeare has written 33 books, and all, if you count the number of words in these books, you will find about 800,000 words. So it's here the hierarchy between those two scales is a very large number compared to any numbers that you can encounter in everyday life, right? Furthermore, many of the background events, so out of those 10 billions, many of them will actually very be similar to the one that you are really interested in. There is many ways to produce 2 photons. So the fact that you observe 2 photons doesn't mean that those 2 photons are coming from the Higgs boson. So you really have to understand and trying to find very distinctive properties of those 2 photons to be able to associate those 2 photons to the Higgs boson. And to give you an example, it's like finding one particular paper in John Ellis' office. It's already difficult to find John Ellis, but finding one paper in John Ellis' office is even more difficult. And actually, if you are doing the algebra correctly, it's not finding one paper in John Ellis' office, but it's finding one particular paper in 1 million copies of John Ellis' offices. Right? So this means that you cannot simply sit down and count the number of events with 2 photons. You really have to understand those particular kinematics of those 2 photons. You have to do some distribution, particularly to look at the momentum of those 2 photons, look at the distribution of the cross-section as the invariant mass of those 2 photons, etc., to be able to distinguish what is coming from the signal out of what is coming from the background. And people have trained a lot to do this kind of exercise to be able to distinguish the signal from the background, and this is a summary of basically what they have done since many years and since what they have been able to reproduce very quickly at the LHE. So they have been able to measure various processes, so the single production of a W, which is a cross-section of this order of magnitude, so about 10,000 times bigger than the production of the Higgs boson. And then there is more and more rare processes, like the production of two top quark. The top quark has been discovered for the first time at Fermilab in 1995. And now it's something that you can really produce abundantly at the LHE, and you can really see them very quickly and be able to basically to compute and measure the cross-section, and it agrees very well with what is predicted by the theory, for instance. And then finally, what has been observed is the production of 2 Z boson, and this has more or less the same cross-section as the production of the Higgs boson. So that was really important for the experimentalists to be able to reproduce, to measure all these things, because it's really, first of all, it's a background for all the search for the Higgs boson. So you really need to make sure that you really be able to measure those kind of things with high precision to be able to disentangle the various processes, what is coming from just electroic background and what is coming from the Higgs boson itself. And then, of course, it's really a good exercise to be able to reconstruct the object, I mean, to be able to reconstruct the Z out of the decay product of the Z, for instance. And then once you have this knowledge, then you can move on and try to look for something much more difficult. So that was the Higgs boson. And actually, the Higgs boson is what Guido Altarelli, which is a famous physicist, used to be at CERN, used to call the Higgs just the emergency tire of the Standard Model. So basically, everybody was looking at it, but it's not really the solution of all our problems. It's just a way, basically, to summarize all the problem. And you can see that very easily in the Lagrangian, which is that you're actually writing for the Higgs boson itself. So usually there is a potential, so there is a vacuum energy, then there is a mass term for the Higgs boson, then there is a Higgs self-interaction, in particular the quartic interaction, and then there is some interaction of the Higgs boson to the fermion. And each of those terms in the Lagrangian actually are associated with the problem of the Standard Model itself. So there is a vacuum energy which is associated to the cosmological constant, something that we really don't understand. Why this vacuum energy is so much smaller compared to the Planck scale, right? Then there is a famous hierarchy problem, namely associated to the mass of the Higgs boson. Why is this mass, again, so much smaller compared to the Planck scale? This is something that, okay, you can put by hand, but then you have to make sure that this is a relation which is stable also quantum mechanically, and this is highly non-trivial. We'll explain that in a moment. Then there is some issues associated with this quartic interaction. In particular, you have to make sure that the potential has the right form in order to generate really this spontaneous symmetry breaking. And this is basically related to the sign of this quartic interaction. If this quartic interaction becomes negative, this means that the electroic vacuum that we are living in becomes actually unstable, and the true vacuum is pushed to infinity. And this can happen. And then the universe will be unstable, and the electroic vacuum can disappear immediately, basically, again. So it was really important to understand what could be the sign of this quartic coupling, and what is the sign at the quantum level, again. And people are doing crazy computations these days. I mean, taking, for instance, the measurement of the top quark, the measurement of the mass of the Higgs boson. Then they have been able, basically, to understand that this quantity, this quartic interaction, can become negative, but not too much negative, in such a way that the electroic vacuum maybe is not stable, but at least it will be metastable, in such a way that the lifetime of the universe will be more than 10 to the 10 years, and then we can go until the end of this talk safely. Right? And then there is some other problem associated to the coupling of the Higgs to the fermion, to the quark and the lepton. Because those coupling here basically generate the masses of the different particles, the masses of the quark, the masses of the lepton, the mass of the electron, etc. And as you know, there is a huge difference between those masses. I mean, the top quark is about 1 million times heavier than the electron. And this is something that you don't understand again. You simply put this hierarchy in those numbers, here, the Yukawa interaction, but you don't understand why they are so different from each other, why they should be almost the same according to their symmetry properties. And not only you have different masses, but those particles also mix with each other, which is called the mixing angle, and there is also a very particular pattern of those mixing angles. And this is something, again, which is not explained. You simply put those things by hand in your Lagrangian, but you have no explanation so far. At least it works well, namely that all the physics associated to these quarks and the lepton, what is called flavor physics, I mean the fact that you have three families, so you have the electron, you have the muon, and you have the tau, so it's just a replication of the same thing 3 times. So this is called the flavor physics. All this flavor physics seems to be very well described by those Yukawa interaction, more precisely by this Kabibo, Kobayashi, Maskawa. So basically all the data in flavor physics is really described very well by this Lagrangian here. With a very few exceptions that have been noticed very recently. For instance, there is this forward-backward asymmetry in the top pair production at Tevatron. So people are producing 2 quarks, one quark top and one anti-top, and you are looking whether the top is coming more in the forward direction compared to the antitop coming in the backward direction. And there is an asymmetry that basically doesn't really agree with what is predicted by the standard model itself. So this is still a puzzle. People don't really know if there is a mistake in the measurement or whether there is really something, a new dynamics that explains this asymmetry. There is also some asymmetry, CP asymmetry in the decays of another quark, which is a charm quark, something, again, that doesn't seem to be really compatible with the standard model measurement. So there are many people, many physicists that are really are thinking very hard about those exceptions, if you want, anomalies, trying to see if there is really some physics, if there are indications of physics beyond the standard model or not. To solve this famous hierarchy problem and this triviality or stability associated to the electric symmetry, people usually call for new physics. For instance, one example is actually supersymmetry. So supersymmetry is basically a symmetry between boson and fermion. You want that the nature to be symmetric under this exchange of boson and fermion, and this is only possible if you add new particles to the standard model. And there is a huge search for this new particle that you expect basically around the TV scale again, so you should expect to see them at the LHC. And I will discuss in a moment the consequences of the fact that we have observed the Higgs boson on the possible discovery of this supersymmetric particle. And then finally, there is a question of the vacuum energy, and this is really a problem associated to how you are dealing with gravity at the quantum level. And so far, nobody really knows how to do that. There are many experts in this room doing string theory. And string theory is certainly an attempt toward quantum gravity, and maybe using those new developments in string theory, you can understand this vacuum energy problem, to understand why basically most of the energy in the universe actually doesn't gravitate, doesn't feel the interaction with the graviton. So I was saying that there is this famous hierarchy problem, and the hierarchy problem is basically a problem associated to the stability of the mass of the Higgs boson at the quantum level. And the simplest way to see that is simply actually to compute really the quantum correction to the mass of the Higgs boson. So as I say, the mass of the Higgs boson is simply the interaction between two Higgs bosons, and now you really compute the corrections which are coming from loop diagrams. So for instance, you get a correction due to the fact that the X is interacting with itself. So you have these diagrams here. The X is also interacting with the W and the Z gauge boson. So this is another correction at one loop. And there is interaction with all the quarks and the lepton. And you can compute explicitly those diagrams. And the problem is that those diagrams are actually divergent. So in principle, you get a result which is infinite. So what it means is simply that if you have a mass scale, if you have new particles which are 1 billion times heavier than the Higgs boson itself at tree level, then those new particles will give a correction to the mass of the Higgs boson, which is 1 billion times bigger than the mass of the Higgs boson itself, which is not possible. So you certainly need a different cancellation among those different contributions. And this is what is called the hierarchy problem. Why there is a cancellation between very large and very big numbers to get a result which is very small. And usually the way people want to solve this hierarchy problem is the following. They simply want to add some symmetry in such a way that the X is forbidden until this particular symmetry is broken. In such a way that the correction to the mass won't be proportional to the higher scale that you have in the theory, but it will be simply proportional to the mass scale at which you are breaking this symmetry. And the simplest example is actually supersymmetry. In supersymmetry, you know that the correction to the mass of the Higgs boson will be proportional to the scale of supersymmetry breaking. The other possibility is actually to see the Higgs simply as a component of the gauge field propagating along extra dimension. So you assume that there is more than 4 space-time dimensions in nature, and then you have some gauge field, so something equivalent to the photon or to the W that can propagate along this extra dimension. And viewed from the 4-dimensional point of view, so view from us, basically, those components could really appear as a Higgs boson itself. And why this is a protection for why this is a protection for the mass of the X simply because you have Lorentz invariant that transform, the different component of this gauge field along this extra dimension. And this Lorentz invariance is basically forbidding a mass term for this X boson to appear. So basically, you will generate a mass, but simply this mass will be inversely proportional to the size of the extra dimension. So it will be really controlled by the infrared physics and not by the UV physics. So only by low energy physics and not by high energy physics. The third possibility is actually to see the X as a pseudo-Nambu-Goldstone boson. And in this case, it's known that there is some translational symmetry that forbids basically the appearance of the mass for this Goldstone boson. So that was the first idea really to forbid the correction to the X boson. There is other, maybe more speculative ideas, which is basically to tell you that there is maybe new physics, but the higher scale that you have in your theory is not the Planck scale, but actually it's a scale which is very close to the TeV scale itself. So basically the scale of quantum gravity is not the Planck scale, so 10 to the 19 GeV, but it will be 1 TeV only. And this is possible if you have very large extra dimension. So again, you are saying that there is space-time, and this space-time involves some extra dimension, but those extra dimensions are actually quite large. It could be as large as 1 millimeter, as long as only gravity propagates into those extra dimensions. So for instance, the electron, the quark won't be able to propagate in those extra dimensions, so you won't see that those extra dimensions are very large. You will feel them only via their gravitational interaction. And basically, the fact that we don't know gravity at distances which are smaller than 1 millimeter will allow the existence of this extra dimension. The other possibility is actually to say that there is many copies of the standard model. So, the scale of quantum gravity is 10 to 19 GeV if there is one copy of the standard model. But what Guy at Valley has realized is that if you introduce 10 to the 32 copies of the standard model, then the scale of the quantum gravity will be 1 TeV again. Of course, it's a very high price to pay, Fine. In particular, there should be 10 to the 32 X boson and not a single one. Right? It's a way that theorists usually solve the problem. They say, well, we have one problem, we create 10 to the 32 problem, and then there is no problem anymore. And then the third possibility, until very recently, was actually to assume that the Higgs boson doesn't exist, actually. And this is what is called technicolor models. But these days, this is quite disfavored by the experimental data. So very quickly, I would like to discuss now the implication of the discovery of the Higgs boson at 125 GeV, in particular the consequences for the supersymmetric theory. So the question is, basically it's a little bit technical, but is supersymmetry, in particular the minimal supersymmetric standard model, a natural theory? So namely, whether the correction to the Higgs boson mass are, of the order of the size that you will like to be compatible with experimental data. So for that, you need to look actually at the expression for the X mass as the function of the other parameters that you have in the theory. So at tree level, again, you get a prediction that the mass of the Higgs boson has to be proportional to the mass of the Z boson times another variable, which is basically some ratio of some vacuum expectation value. But anyway, this number is always smaller than 1. So at tree level, you were expecting that the Higgs boson was basically smaller than the mass of the Z boson. Of course, this was excluded. So certainly, you need to add new correction to this prediction of supersymmetry. So in particular, there is some quantum mechanical correction associated, for instance, to the loop of the top quark, etc. But now the fact that we know that the mass of the Higgs boson is 125, we know basically exactly what we need to add into this formula. So the correction, the loop correction, has to be heavier than 87 GeV. So this means that you certainly need a large contribution coming from the loop of those new superparticles. And here, this is the diagrams that show you basically the mass of the Higgs boson as the mass scale of these new particles, as a function of what is called a mixing angle between those two superparticles, in the mixing angle between the two stops. So in the case when there is no mixing angle at all, so xt is equal to 0, this is the mass of the Higgs boson as a function of the mass of the stop. And you see that basically you cannot reach 125 GeV. So this is telling you that if you want to reach this mass scale for the Higgs boson, you certainly need to introduce a mixing, and actually this mixing has to be very close to maximal, so there is a maximal value for this mixing, and in this case only it's possible to reach this high value for the Higgs mass. So the conclusion is that observing a 125 GeVx is telling you that you need large mixing, and you still need rather heavy stop mass. I mean, the stop has to be heavier than 500 or 700 GeV. And these has some consequences, what is called the fine-tuning. So the fine-tuning is the amount of gain, basically, is a measure of the probability of getting the right point if you just draw, I mean, if you take random point in the parameter space of your theory. And this is basically the measure of the amount of fine-tuning that you need to do. So here, 50 means that you need to pick 20 points in the parameter space to get at least one which is reproducing correctly the data. Right? And here, in this blue and pink region, here has a region that really reproduces correctly the value of the Higgs mass. So at least the Higgs mass which is between 124 and 126 GeV. So what you see is that there is only very particular point where you are able to reproduce the value of the Higgs mass. In particular, those points really predict maximal value of this mixing between the two stops. So maximal mixing means the mixing divided by the mass of the stop should be of the order of square root of 6. That's exactly what you see here. Right? So that's the minimum point. That's the minimal, I mean, the point where you get the minimum amount of fine-tuning, but this is still about 1%. So you really need to take about 100 random points in the parameter space to get a point which is compatible with the data. So that's something which is not very natural. And again, I mean, if you are deviating from the maximal mixing, very quickly, you are basically raising the fine-tuning like crazy. So there is very particular region of the parameter space that are only compatible with the experimental data. And that's basically the constraints which are coming from the direct search of those super particles, in particular the stop. And here you have getting some constraints that are really approaching the value of the mass which is needed to reproduce the mass of the Higgs boson, about 500 GeV. So what are the possible ways to save SUSY? So what are the possible ways to really get a supersymmetric model which is compatible with nature? Well, there is at least two different approaches. The first one is to say, okay, supersymmetry is a natural theory, but it just doesn't correspond to the minimal model that people have been thinking for so many years. Right? At the end, the standard model itself, is not really minimal. So why the supersymmetric extension should be minimal? Right? It was just only, a working assumption to be able to make the simplest easiest prediction, but it seems that those predictions are not compatible with what is observed. So you need to go beyond the minimal models. And for that, there is various ways. So for instance, you can add a new scalar, which is called the next to minimal supersymmetric model, or you can find some way basically to hide supersymmetry. By suppressing, for instance, the missing energies, by breaking R parity, which was a particular symmetry of those supersymmetric models that were really producing those missing energies, so some events that are easy to see, easy to observe. The other possibility is basically to abandon the idea that supersymmetry is really what is protecting the value of the Higgs mass. Basically, the supersymmetry is still a symmetry of nature, but it doesn't explain why the Higgs mass is so low compared to the Planck scale, for instance. And there is various approach. For instance, there is a split supersymmetry. Split supersymmetry is a case where you keep basically all the supersymmetric partners, which are fermionic, around the weak scale, but all the supersymmetric partners, which are scalars, you send them at very high energy. And this is good because this is a way basically to maintain one very nice prediction of supersymmetry, which is unification. So unification of the gauge coupling only requires basically to introduce new fermions at the weak scale. But you can send all the scalars at very high energy without destroying this very nice prediction of supersymmetry. The other case is basically when you send all these new particles that were predicted by supersymmetry at very high energy. And at the end, that's the only thing that really matters for string theorists. String theorists want supersymmetry at the Planck scale. They don't care whether supersymmetry really exists at the weak scale or not. So it's important to test whether or not the existence of this 125 GVX is able or not to tell you anything about this idea that supersymmetry is there but is broken at very high energy. And this is a result of this plot. So this plot is showing you, the scale of supersymmetry breaking as a function of the X mass, or the other way around. And basically in this plot, you can see here the preferred experimental region for the value of the X mass, and basically you get from that a bound on the scale of supersymmetry breaking. So for instance, the first scenario, the split supersymmetry models are already constrained to have a scale of supersymmetry which is below 10 to the 8 GeV. So far, if you look carefully about these other models, the high-scale supersymmetry, you can still have a scale of supersymmetry breaking up to the Planck scale without any real trouble. So basically, the fact that we have observed this 125 GVX doesn't rule out yet the possibility that supersymmetry exists at the Planck scale. Maybe one day we will arrive to that. For that, you will need to reduce the precision on the measurement of the Higgs boson, and then you can reduce basically this window, which is favored by the experimental measurement. Okay, so the third part, running late, but the third part of the talk was actually to discuss what has really been observed at the LHE. Because I was saying all the newspapers are saying that we have discovered the Higgs boson. But how can we be sure that it's really the Higgs boson and nothing else that will look like the Higgs boson? So what the experimentalists are actually measuring is this kind of things, is what they call the signal strength, which is simply the product of the cross-section production for the Higgs boson times the branching ratio for the decays of the Higgs into various particles. And usually they normalize this quantity to the standard model in such a way that if nature is really standard, it really corresponds to the standard model, all what they should measure should be exactly equal to 1. Right? And this is basically what they report. So they look at their data and they make some plot like that give you the value of this signal strength as a function of what will be the mass of the Higgs boson. Of course, they produce this plot. There is still a lot of information that they don't want to give to you. For instance, the correlation among these various channels. Right? They look into the case where the Higgs decays into 2 photons, the case where the Higgs decays into 2 Z boson, etc., etc. But of course, all these channels are correlated with each other. But that's secret information that they don't want to give to you. There is also the question of efficiency. So basically, they need, as I say, they need to put some cuts to be able to disentangle the signal from the background. And this is basically the amount or the probability that, of all the Higgs that have been produced actually pass those cuts. So that's some percentage number that they don't want to give to you, or they give to you from one particular channel, but not for all of them. And out of that, basically, you have to understand, from those plots, you have to understand, you have to reconstruct basically what are the quantum numbers of the Higgs boson. So you want to measure its spin, this property under this charge conjugation, etc. So you want to check whether it's really a scalar which is CP even. And you want to basically to be able to measure all the particular coupling to all the standard model degrees of freedom, to the W, to the quark, and the lepton, and see whether or not they agree with the prediction that I was making at the beginning, that A is equal to B is equal to C for all the particles. Right? That's another way to plot the same kind of data. So you do basically a chi-squared fit as a function of the Higgs mass times the cross-section. Right? That's the preferred region. And here you see that the preferred region for the data is really telling you that the Higgs is around 125 GeV. This is something that you can read on this plot. And the other plot is simply reporting the signal strength for the various channels. And I was saying, if the Higgs is really the standard model Higgs boson, all those numbers have to be equal to 1. Right? And here you can see that there is some number, some channel that have some large deviation compared to the standard model. So you want to interpret those data and be able basically to reconstruct all the coupling of the Higgs boson. But for that, you need basically, in order to be able to establish whether the Higgs is a standard model or not, you need to have a theory that allows you to deform the standard model Lagrangian, right? And one possibility, so you want to have a model where the Higgs is not the standard model Higgs boson, and you also don't want to have any other degrees of freedom, any new physics that hasn't been observed so far. So for that, you need a mass gap between the mass of the Higgs boson and the scale of new physics. And one nice possibility to generate this mass gap is indeed to assume that the Higgs is a Goldstone boson. And then, because of this symmetry, you will have naturally this separation of scale. And in a sense, it's just a very simple generalization of the standard model. So in the standard model, you have this longitudinal W and the Z, which were the Goldstone boson associated to the breaking of this chiral symmetry, SO4, which is SU2 left cross SU2 right, broken to SU2 diagonal or SO3. And the idea of seeing the Higgs as a Goldstone boson is simply to enlarge this global symmetry of the standard model. So you will embed SO4 into a bigger global group, which is spontaneously broken, in such a way that in this coset you will find at least a fourth Goldstone boson that you can identify as a standard model Higgs. So there are various examples. The simplest is, of course, to start with SO5 broken to SO4, this producing exactly 4 Goldstone bosons. So that's a minimal composite Higgs model. And you can go a little bit more crazy, playing a little bit with more mathematics, for instance, with SO6 broken to SO4 cross SO2, then you have 8 Goldstone bosons that will exactly reproduce 2 doublet of the gauge symmetry, of SU2 gauge symmetry. So this is a minimal composite 2X doublet model. But the real question is, can you tell the difference between those kind of Higgs compared to the standard model Higgs boson? And basically, how can you, what are the experimental constraints on these kind of models? So for that, basically, you generalize this kind of effective Lagrangian that I was writing before. So you have a Higgs boson, and you write all the possible interaction to your other particles. So there is self-interaction of the Higgs with itself. Then there is the interaction that I was writing at the beginning. So the interaction of the Higgs with the W and the Z, a linear interaction, a quadratic interaction. And then there is more and more complicated interaction that you can write if you are probing higher and higher energy. And all those coupling here are normalized in such a way that the standard model actually corresponds to A equal B equal C equal 1, and all the other complicated interactions are actually vanishing. So what you want to do is basically measure individually each of those numbers and see whether or not you are reproducing the standard model. So of course, here you are making a few assumptions. So you are already putting basically that the Higgs is a spin zero particle, so it's a scalar field, and this is due to the fact that it looks like there is a strong coupling of the Higgs to the photon, and this is possible only basically if the Higgs is really a spin zero particle. If it were a spin 1 particle, it couldn't couple to the photon. There is also a CP even, and this is coming from the fact that the Higgs is actually coupled to the W and the Z. And there is also further assumptions that are coming from the data. And actually, out of those long list of parameters, for what has been measured so far at the LHE, you can keep only 2 of them. The others are totally irrelevant. They give you very small correction to what you can measure. So you can neglect them and really try to fit all the data in terms of those 2 parameters. And those two parameters are simply the correction of the coupling of the Higgs to 2W or the correction to the coupling of the Higgs to 2 fermions. Okay. And of course, there is other parameters, but those other parameters that will be very interesting are, for the future. So for instance, you can measure those kind of new interaction which is absent in the standard model, which is a contact interaction between 2 Higgs and 2 top quark. And this, it's really a direct probe that the Higgs is a composite object and not an elementary particle. There is also this new production of 2 Higgs boson by the fusion of 2 W gauge boson. And again, this is something which is growing with the energy, so something that will be becoming strong. So there is a strong interaction which will occur if this diagram exists. And there is even more exotic interaction, like this, for instance, triple Higgs production by fusion of W boson. And this is a very interesting process because it will allow you really to understand something about the symmetry of this coset space. in the sense that if this coset space is a symmetric space, so it's a symmetric space, there is some very particular properties when you flip the sign of the Ghost-tone, then in this case, if the coset space is symmetric, then it cannot mediate those interactions that involve an odd number of Ghost-tone bosons. So this means that in this case, this process, WW goes to 3 x's, is forbidden if the coset space is a symmetric space. So basically, if you're able to measure, to see this particular process, you are learning something directly about the geometry of this coset space. So you are learning something really qualitative about the geometry of your strong interaction, basically. Or if you want, you are basically checking those sum rules among the various couplings, a sum rule which is satisfied only if the coset space is symmetric. Okay, well, I will go quickly because we are running out of time. So basically some technicalities, how you can really use the search that have been done for the standard model and simply rescale them in terms of those 2 parameters. That's basically the result of the fit. So you want to take all those numbers that have been reported by the experimentalist in order to extract the value of those 2 parameters, A and C. And as I say, the standard model should be sitting at A and C equal to 1, so it's this particular point. So you are really now exploring some deformation of the standard model, and you are seeing whether or not the data is telling you that what you are measuring is, what you are observing is a standard model Higgs boson, or whether it's something else. And the result of the fit is basically those 2 preferred regions. There is one which is in the vicinity of the standard model, and there is another region which corresponds actually to flipping the sign of the coupling of the Higgs to the top quark. And this is due to the fact that you have an enhancement in the gamma-gamma channel, so you are producing more photons than what was predicted in the standard model, and this is possible if the sign is negative because you have some constructive quantum mechanical interference between various processes in this case. So at the moment, the data really favors this dysfermiophilic Higgs boson. And you can see also, you can also look at how this fit is evolving with time. So that was a fit, using the data before the announcement of what has been reported at these winter conferences. This is the result after these winter conferences. And finally, this is the result after this July 4th result. In particular, what has been observed is that here the region around C equal to 0, so for Higgs boson that doesn't couple to the fermion at all, is actually now ruled out by the experimental data. So you have learned for sure that the Higgs is actually coupled to the quark and the leptons. And this is also some individual fit to the various experiments, also how those experiments are evolving with time. So this is a data which is evolving quite rapidly. So for instance, if you look at this fit here, that was a fit after the data that were reported on July 4th, so at CERN, with the seminar at CERN, and a few days later at Melbourne, the experimentalist has reported a few more channels that basically affecting, cutting out some further region of the parameter space. So every day, basically, there are more data that are making public, and you can incorporate those new data into the fit and see how they are evolving. So now the experimentalists themselves are actually doing those fit, and you can compare, the theoretical prediction here in red with the experimental one, basically in this region here in black, in this line. And you see basically that you don't need to be an experimentalist, or you don't need to have access to all this secret data to be able to reproduce a good fit. So basically, simply on your laptop, you can really analyze all this LHC data and see whether the X is really the standard model X or not. The other thing that you can try to learn is also if there is actually new particles, beyond the one that have been observed in the standard model. So for instance, the standard model, this new particle could be charged under could carry some charge under the standard model gauge group. And in this case, they will translate simply into new interaction between the X and the photon on the gluon. And this is basically the prediction, the fit of the experimental data in terms of those new interaction between the X and the photon on the gluon. The other possibility is, of course, that those new particles are actually neutral under the standard model gauge group. They still couple to the X. And in this case, for us, they will simply appear as invisible decays of the Higgs boson. So they will simply reduce all the branching ratio of the Higgs into visible particle. And that's, again, something that you can try to fit. And at the moment, the experimental data is not forbidding an invisible decay of the Higgs at the order of 40%. So it's quite surprising yet that there may be new invisible particles that are just coupled to the Higgs boson. Okay, I think I will stop here because I'm running out of time. There are a few more details, but they are technical anyway. And I can go directly to the conclusion. So I think 50 years after the Gargamel experiment, that was the first experiment that really established the structure of the standard model. We still need another experiment basically to time the newly discovered neutral current of the standard model, namely the Higgs boson itself. And this Gargamel experiment was really important because it was the first one to really establish this gauge theory as really a principle of nature. So basically the fact that we have really understood that this neutral current of the standard model, the weak neutral current, was really the neutral current associated to the gauge interaction of the standard model. And at the moment, we still don't know exactly what is the physical principle that governs the neutral current associated to the Higgs boson. Whether it's new gauge interaction, whether it's extra dimension, whether it's supersymmetry, we still don't know. And that's really the question that people are trying to understand by observing the Higgs boson and trying to understand all the properties of the Higgs boson. And maybe this observation of the Higgs is really the first door towards a new structure of matter. As Jean Iliopoulos really described nicely yesterday in a talk in Paris, there was a pre-gauge theory world, basically where people were observing particles, and then by the observation of those particles, they were trying to understand really what are the possible interactions of all these particles. And then, in the 60s, basically, emerged those gauge theories. And this was totally a revolution in the way people were thinking, because instead, of looking at the details, they were just assuming, or if you want, they were just trying to understand the symmetries of the series. And from the symmetries, you can directly deduce the interaction of those particles. But still, I will say that this revolution is not complete yet, because the different particles are treated differently. Of course, the gauge theory are really great for the interaction of the gauge boson. So in the sense that you know exactly what gauge boson you have to introduce, and they are associated to the gauge symmetries. And you know all the dynamics, all the interaction of those gauge boson. For the fermion, you have much more degrees of freedom. In a sense, the content of this fermion is totally arbitrary. The dynamics of the fermion are still governed, at least partially, by the gauge interaction, by the gauge symmetry. But why do you need, for instance, free family is still a totally open question without an answer. There is a lot of freedom there. And finally, about the scalars, there is total arbitrariness in the scalar, and furthermore, there is some instability associated to these scalars. So we really need to understand, if there is any relation between these different kinds of matter, whether there is any relation between scalars and fermion, like in supersymmetry, whether there is any relation between scalars and gauge boson, like in theory with extra dimension. And maybe, after all, this is the kind of question that string theory can answer in the future. So thank you very much.